On Ag PhD, we don't spend a tremendous amount of time talking about irrigation just because a small percent of our nation's corn, soybeans, and wheat is under pivot, as many people would often say talking about irrigation. But Darren, irrigation's a lot more than just under pivot anymore.
Well, it certainly is. You've got flood irrigation, you've got subsurface drip tape irrigation, you've got guys that have subsurface drainage tile that they're backfeeding water through to try and sub-irrigate that way. There's a number of different ways to get more water out into your field. And when you think about it, for a lot of guys, we get to the end of the year and we say, well, why didn't your corn yield more? Well, I didn't get enough rain, or the rain didn't come timely. You know, I got a big rain here and then, boy, it didn't rain for a month here and that was really tough. My crop was suffering. So, you know, irrigation is a pretty important thing.
Yeah, so just in our state, in South Dakota, for example, the number of permits that we're getting looked at in 2013, it's like 4 or 5 times more than normal, because what was 2012? Well, it was a drought year. And anytime after drought, people start thinking, well, I need to irrigate. And we often say, you know, the time to think about irrigation is coming off a flood year, because then nobody wants to do it. You can probably buy the equipment a lot cheaper, and you don't have so many issues going through the permitting process. But anyway, the whole point is, if you're considering irrigation, you've got to look at a few different factors, and I always like to talk to the people that have done it for lots of years. We used to do a bunch of irrigation on our farm too, and so we'll talk through some of the issues that are out there, some of the challenges, and also obviously some of the benefits.
One of the issues that can come up if you're going to do some irrigation on your farm is what your water quality is. I've talked to many farmers over the years who have had poor water quality that they're irrigating with, and have actually made their fields worse by putting on this irrigation water. They've got things like high levels of salts in the water, or they have just an extremely high pH water that they're putting out, and they think that may be adding to things. So sometimes you need to not irrigate, and it could be a better thing if you've got water problems.
Or you have to treat that water potentially, or you may consider putting in some drain tile below ground. Now, it may seem strange where you say, well, I need to irrigate, and I need to irrigate all the time. Why would I put some drain tile in? Well, the problem is, are you irrigating perfectly across every single square foot of your field? And rarely is that answer going to be yes. It's very easy to overdo it, at least in some spots in the field. Well, if you have a little too much excess moisture flowing down in your tile line, get that out of the field. And also keep in mind, salts are very leachable. So if we have good drainage in the field, those salts are going to flush right through in a lot of cases. So we don't have the high pH issue. We don't have the high salt issue. This is a big thing that we want you to think about.
Well, one other thing that is a consideration if you're doing irrigation is you may want to run something else through that pivot at the same time.
Or through your subsurface or any other type of irrigation you're doing.
Yes, for example, let's say you want to put on some more fertility. Well, what a great way to do that. You're going to put water out that the plant roots are going to take in. Now you can also have those plant roots pull in some more plant food with the water. It seems like an ideal situation, and it can be. You just have to do some testing ahead of time to see what nutrients your plants are short in. Or if you've figured this out ahead of time with your whole fertility program, you can schedule that in and plan accordingly.
And you want to be real careful about what soil type you're putting this on. For example, a lot of the irrigation that's done near us is in very sandy ground. Okay, that very sandy ground has a low cation exchange capacity. Let's call it 5. If you had a 5 cation exchange capacity, multiply that number times 10, you can roughly hold about 50 pounds of nitrogen at any one time. If the ground's already sitting there with 20 or 30 pounds, how much can you put on? An additional 20 or 30 pounds, well, that's not much. What we're trying to tell you is just don't overdo it. If you've got irrigation, if you put on too much water and you're putting on too much nitrogen, chances are that excess nitrogen is going to end up in a tile line, or it's going to end up in the groundwater somewhere, and that's something you absolutely want to avoid.
Well, just like when we're spraying across a field with a ground rig, for example, Brian, farmers like to tie in more than one thing. So what about bug control? What about fungicides? Are those things that could potentially be put over the top with irrigation?
Yeah, it's possible. So the bug control, certainly we used to do a lot of that, and there's still a lot of farmers that are doing that all over the country. I don't have a big issue with that, especially if it's pivot and you're running the irrigation, you're sprinkling over the top. When it comes to fungicide, that gets a lot more difficult, because think about it, when you're out there spraying, what do they tell you to put out? Maybe 20, 30 gallons of water per acre at the very most. Okay, if you put on even 1/10 of an inch, you've put on over 2,700 gallons per acre. What I'm trying to say is your droplets aren't going to be very concentrated. How much of that fungicide is actually going to get into the plant? The odds that you're going to get control are a lot less, in my opinion.
Well, there's certainly a lot of things to consider. If you're thinking about irrigating your crop in one way or another, there's several different forms of irrigation and other things that can be done at the same time that you're adding water to your field. Unfortunately, one of those things that we can't really do through a pivot is control our weed of the week effectively. Our weed of the week is coming up next.